Welcome, everyone. So glad to see so many of you here. My name is Jessica Savage, and I am the Director of Community Collaboration at the Vermont Council on Rural Development. This is our legislative roundup. It is a focus on opportunities for Vermont communities today, and we have some wonderful guests that will introduce themselves briefly here, but I just wanted to give everybody some grounding and some context for today. I wanted to introduce myself. I wanted to introduce the other staff I'm joined by today, who is Lauren Brady. Lauren, do you want to say hi?
Hi, yeah, I'm Lauren Brady, Community Engagement and Policy Associate for VCRD.
Thanks, Lauren. And Lauren's the one who'll be monitoring the chat. If you have any issues with any technical aspects of this or anything, you can always message her and she's paying attention to that. Later on, I think we will be joined by Jenna Koloski. She had to take a press call this morning about our Youth Opportunity Initiative, so she'll be probably joining us later, but we're the staff reps today. So why are you here? You're here because you're hopefully getting emails and are a part of our Vermont Community Leadership Network, VCLN. And this network connects and supports local leaders as you build projects, organizations, and systems that serve your communities and Vermont's short, urgent, and long-term needs. This network supports members with various workshops like this. We also have a library of past recorded workshops. You can see past legislative roundups if you're curious how things have changed. We have workshops on things like community engagement, on long-term recovery groups, lots and lots of different topics. And Lauren, if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat the link to our workshop library, that's a great way to find topics that are relevant to hopefully the work that you're doing. And we also create and provide resources like our community leadership guide, which you can find a PDF of on our website. We have a few stray physical copies left in the world, but getting low on those. And that leadership guide kind of pulls together all of the resources that we have found over the many years of working with community leaders like yourself. Really are the tips and tricks and the insider way of framing the kind of work that you're doing. I should pause and tell you a little bit about VCRD, although hopefully you're familiar with us if you're here. So we are an independent, actively nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We provide neutral facilitation, technical assistance, and connection to state and federal resources to Vermont's communities and those that support them. So people like you, we work with people like you all over the state every day. We're best known for our community visit process, but we do lots of other things as well, including these kind of workshops. So I told you about the Leadership Network, and we'd love if you haven't joined the Leadership Network so that you can get updates, you can find out about opportunities. We'd love to invite you to do that. It's really easy. Lauren, if you put the link in the chat for that too, that would be awesome. Yeah, more to come this year on all these different kinds of topics. So why are we here today? What is this topic all about? Our legislative roundup. So as the session comes to a close each year, we hear the news. We hear the news about bills that are successful, the realities of the state budget, the up and down of vetoes, the possible overrides, and even some controversy. This year, we've heard about quote unquote first in the nation bills on digital privacy, on climate change, on historic compromises on Act 250. This session also, I just should note, saw the loss of two long-serving legislators, Senator Mazza and Senator Sears. And it was a session that was also filled with what sounds like a lot of work. And some of the folks on the panel today are representing a lot of the folks who've done a lot of that work this session. So community leaders, especially this time of year when we start seeing these headlines, are often left wondering how these decisions were made under the Golden Dome and how they will affect their towns and villages. What regulations will apply to them and when? What funding will be available for their priorities? What changes can they expect to see and when will they happen? So this is the second year of our 2023 and 2024 biennium as we have here in Vermont as our system. So as it wraps up, we thought it would be a good idea to bring together some speakers with a deep understanding of this session and the practical results of those decisions, and give you an opportunity to hear from them, but also to ask your questions and have a discussion about our hopes, our concerns, our questions for this coming year and the work ahead. So I'll pause there and make sure everything's going well. I had to turn off my screen. Everybody getting in and getting what they need for today. I see 3 pages of participants now, so that's good. So the plan for today is I'm going to ask you all to do something first. So maybe you thought you were going to come and turn your screen off and just listen in the background to this. But there is a participatory element to this today. We felt like we didn't want to just talk at you about this session. And this came from the panelists, so thank you, and especially Chris for that suggestion. So we're going to ask you to participate in the way that works for you. You don't have to turn on your screen if you don't want to. But we're going to ask you to give us, what are the questions? What are the themes that you're looking to hear more about? Then I'm gonna, and we'll do that. I'll give you some instructions on how we're gonna do that with an activity in a minute in the chat. And then I'm gonna ask a few questions of the speakers so we can hear from them, from their perspective about this session. And then based on what those themes are that we hear from you, we're gonna, Lauren in the background is gonna break us into what we think will be 4 topic areas. Maybe it'll be less, we'll see. And you can choose which breakout you would like to go into at that point. And one of the panelists will go with you so that you can go a little deeper on that theme. And then we'll come back to hear some reflections on that discussion from the panelists. And then if we have time, we'll take a couple of questions in the full group. So please jot down any thoughts or questions that come up for you. And you can always put it in the chat and we'll kind of keep track of that. Okay. So that's the plan for the day. Does that sound good to everyone? Great, I see nodding heads. I love seeing nodding heads on Zoom. It makes me feel like you're really with me. Great. Okay, so like I said, we wanted to bring you a variety of perspectives today. All of these people, I can safely say, are working tirelessly during the session to make, encourage, and track decisions that benefit our communities from their different roles in the decision-making process. So we're going to hear from nonprofit perspective, from a quasi-state agency, from an actual state agency, sorry, VHB, maybe that's not how you would call yourself, but I would call you a quasi-state agency, and a legislator today. But very quickly, you know, we don't want to get into the content and ask you to do just an introduction of who you are. And then we're going to do an audience participation moment. Okay, so tell us who you are and what organization you represent. And I'm going to call on Polly first because you're first on my screen.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and it's nice to see everyone this morning. I'm Polly Major. I'm the Policy Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And we are an instrumentality of the state. So a statewide organization that's created by the legislature to invest in the production of affordable housing and land conservation. And over the years, that mission has really expanded to also mean investing in the vitality of communities around the state. So we also have a farm and forest viability program that works to support our working lands businesses. And we have a rural economic development initiative program that works to build capacity in rural communities to pull down funding to accomplish community development projects. So as the policy director for VHCB, a lot of my work is to work with the legislature and the federal delegation and the agency partners that we have across our mission area. And in doing so, really, I think about it as a communications role to communicate what we're hearing from the partners on the ground at all of your communities who want to build housing, who want to conserve land, outdoor recreation facilities, community buildings, and to bring that to policymakers and say, this is what we're hearing as barriers, this is what we're hearing as opportunities, and this is what we're hearing as needs. a lot of, because we're a funding agency, a lot of the work that we're doing is around what are the resources needed to kind of accomplish those goals. So in the Statehouse, I focus a lot on tracking legislation that touches housing, both housing done through VHCB and our partners and the rest of the housing ecosystem. And on the conservation side as well, the conversations around land use and also around our agricultural economy. Maybe I'll end there and pass it back to Jess.
Yeah, thanks, Polly. Thanks so much for being here and for all the work you guys do. Chris, you're next on my screen.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday, and I'm enjoying the cool weather. I am. My name is Chris Cochran. I work for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Revitalization. And you probably don't know a lot about us, but you probably know something about some of the programs we administer. So we administer the state designation program. So we designate downtowns and village centers, growth centers and neighborhoods and all these different kinds of designations. We were the center of a lot of discussion this year because one of our big goals this year was to simplify and modernize this program and to remove the barriers to make it easier for communities to participate in the programs and share in the benefits more equally. I like to describe ourselves as kind of the connective tissue between a lot of the sister and state agencies and departments that we work with. A lot of our focus is land use. We work closely with the regional planning commissions. I feel like a lot of our stuff is very upstream from communities. I think the analogy, I don't know if you remember, but there was that commercial from, I don't know, 15 years ago from BSAF. You know, they don't make a lot of the products that you use, but they make a lot of the things you do better. I see that's a lot of our role is kind of figuring out how do we align our policies, how do we make our programs stack better so that people in your positions can actually take these programs, take these multiple funding stacks and achieve your local goals. And I'll stop there. Oh, my role in the Statehouse. Right, I was kind of right in the middle of the whole Land Use Act 250 conversation. The prior year, we did a big land use initiative called the Home Act, which was really about creating more housing options in areas where we have sewer and water and getting our communities more welcoming to change and new people, because I think we do need some new people in this state. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. All right, Josh.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces, folks to work with over the years, as well as new faces. It's a fairly new role for me at the League. I was at the Department of Housing and Community Development for almost 20 years. In the League, our role is to represent the interests of all 247 municipalities in the state, which can be pretty varied from the larger municipalities to the smaller municipalities. But there's definitely some common threads and some interests and some concerns and opportunities. And my job really with the legislature is to communicate that with our members, make sure we're pushing our interests where it makes sense and trying to help people understand the varying challenges that municipalities have, not just through legislation and just in the Statehouse, but also working with state agencies as partners to try to come up with solutions and better ways to implement and work together, as well as some of our federal partners. As in the end of the day, much of what government at any level, the decisions they make, it sort of comes home to rest in municipalities and how things get implemented and how residents benefit or have increased challenges from those decisions. So good to be here and talk with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Representative Sibilia.
Good morning. Laura Sibilia, representing Wyndham 2 in Southern Vermont, towns of Dover, Wardsboro, Jamaica, and Stratton. I've served in the legislature since 2015. I'm currently the vice chair of the Environment and Energy Committee. I am one of 3 independents that serve in the legislature, and I'm speaking to you today with my Rural Caucus co-chair hat on. The Rural Caucus has typically been House-centered. I would say this past session, we had a number of senators who also participated, which was great. The Rural Caucus is a group of up to 50 legislators, tripartisan. We have folks, Democrats, Republicans, progressives, all of the independents, and working together on items where there is consensus across that group, rural consensus across that group. Spent a lot of time on land use. We very frequently weigh in on Act 250 proposed changes. We've spent a lot of time talking and advocating for assistance with capacity gaps that there are in rural Vermont, as well as the ag and forestry sector. We've spent a lot of time over the years working with VCRD on working lands and VLCT on any number of small town issues. And so really happy to be here today with you to talk about the work that the Rural Caucus did this year.
Great, thank you so much, Representative Sibilia. And we might be joined by some of your colleagues. I was looking through the group here. So if you are here with a legislator hat on, thank you for being here. And we hope you could chime in. Okay, so before we dive into questions for our panelists, like I promised, we're gonna do this moment. So does everybody know how to get into the chat? Yeah? Okay. So what you're gonna do is we'd love to get a sense of a topic area that you'd like to dive a little deeper on later on in our panel. But we're gonna do it as a waterfall. So don't press enter yet. Have you ever done a chat waterfall? It's kind of fun. This is just because it's fun, not because we need to do it this session. Why not? It's Friday, do something fun. So type in the theme, the question you have, the thing you want to go deeper with one of these panelists on later on, but don't press enter until I say so. Okay, so I'm going to give you until 10, I'll give you like 30 seconds to type in the thing in your chat. And then we'll press enter all at once. And then if you have your chat open, you'll be like, whoa. Sound good? Everyone got their thing? Oh, somebody went ahead. That's okay. It's okay. Just don't press enter if you can help it. Please don't press enter. Just type it in. All right, are we ready? We ready? We got our things? Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, enter. It pleases me greatly. Hopefully it made you happy too. Great, thank you. I'm seeing some awesome themes in there. Yeah, this is great. So while we're having our deep conversation, if you didn't have a chance to put it in, it's okay. Just put it in when you can. And Lauren's gonna take the time that we're talking a little bit of it and kind of cull this for a few themes so we can do a breakout group after our discussion. Okay. Yeah, it is fun to see the waterfall. Oh yes, I see Representative Maslin is here. Thank you for being here. Okay, so let's dive in, guys. I'd love to hear from each of you. We're going to kind of do a round from each of you for a few minutes each. You know, what do you see as the top 2 to 3 opportunities, the most impactful bills, legislation, or decision points from this past session for communities and community leaders, especially to know about? Who'd like to go first? Anyone feel excited? Otherwise, I'll just voluntold you. So I'm talking to the panel right now, Buster, sorry, but we'll get to your questions later, I promise. Okay, so Chris, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
No surprise. And I will say we should try not to wade into the details of this bill because it is huge. But the big Land Use Act 250 housing bill was, I think, a pretty significant game changer for how Vermont does land use in the state, how Vermont plans for and supports housing development in smart growth locations. It will take out and modernize how the designation programs work. So I think it will change a lot. I think it will make things a lot better. But I would caution everybody, it is not going to happen overnight. Nobody needs to worry. Nobody needs to do anything immediately, and nobody's going to lose any of their designation benefits. But over time, working closely with our partners, the regional planning commissions and the Natural Resources Board, we are going to refine and develop these frameworks and stand them up. And I think they will be meaningful and impactful in how Vermont grows and how Vermont grows more resilient and how Vermont grows more equitably and becomes economically stronger in the face of climate change.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Chris. How about Polly? Will you go next?
Happy to. And I was hoping Chris would go first so I could say ditto on the land use bill from affordable housing and conservation perspective. That bill's focus on a smart growth framework really helps advance both those goals. And in order to build more housing, particularly affordable housing, we need investment as well. So when I think about the opportunities coming out of this session, I really look at the funding environment, and the state has made historic investments in affordable housing over the last several years with the pandemic stimulus funding, and that is becoming more challenging moving forward. So we are seeing a reduction in resources available to build housing at the same time as we're seeing increased costs to build. And so that's going to be a challenge as we try to take advantage of the opportunities created by the land use bill. The exact place where we landed in funding for building housing in the state is actually still up in the air, because what the budget did is it earmarked any unused ARPA funds that might be available moving into the fall for two really major housing programs in the state. The permanently affordable housing funded through VHCB, that Buster includes farm worker housing, includes refugee housing, a number of the priorities I saw listed in the chat. There's up to 30 million for those uses, and also a housing program that creates middle income housing, what we think about as workforce housing, administered through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. So we don't know exactly where we landed quite yet, and what kind of projects move forward will really depend on resources available.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Polly. Representative Sibilia, I see you off mute. Do you want to go next?
Sure. So I would say ditto. That bill is massive and has historic changes in it around our land use policies. The Rural Caucus engaged quite heavily in that throughout the session. And we're able to secure a number of amendments that were helpful, we thought, towards rural Vermont. In the end, the Rural Caucus ended up splitting their vote on that, but it is a really consequential bill. The other one I would really note that I think is potentially very impactful is Act 118. And this is relating to the County and Regional Governance Study Committee. This is for rural communities. We're thinking about this challenge around capacity. This is looking at having various entities examine how to best strengthen county level government in Vermont to enhance and optimize public safety, tax collection, and resource allocation. So that is potentially a really big bill. So I will highlight that with my rural caucus hat on.
Thank you. Great, interesting. I have lots of questions, but we'll save those for later. Okay, Josh.
Yeah, well, ditto obviously to the Act 250 bill, but going a little bit different direction here. First, thank the legislator, administration, everyone that got together on a few things, and there was a lot of agreement on, because those matter to communities. And in the big picture, the public safety bills, there was a lot of public safety bills that folks reached a real deep compromise. You know, not everyone was happy on the extremes, but there was a lot of work that put forward that means a lot to communities and safety in the state. Second was flood response. You know, there was, again, very good cooperation and urgency to the flood response and recovery efforts right at the beginning of the session. And we sort of forget that there was a lot of work done. Exactly what folks asked for. It was thoughtful and meaningful. And there's a lot of communities that, you know, need that recovery. So thanks there. You know, I would say that from municipal perspective, there's a couple others that are pretty important. And another huge thank you goes to the in the miscellaneous tax bill. There was authorization for municipalities to pass a local option tax through an annual or special meeting, not requiring a charter. You know, only half the communities in the state have a charter, not requiring an amendment to a charter if you have one, and then getting legislative approval. It's done by the voters of a town to bring in new resources, you know, up to 1% on rooms, meals, and sales tax. And it was sort of a game changer, I think, with the increasing property taxes this year due to education. Municipalities are reducing their municipal budget, and particularly a local option tax on rooms. I think short-term rentals is a way to generate some local revenue and not impact the wallets of residents and taxpayers. Also, the open meeting law. You know, this was a sort of, I'd say, a mixed bag from municipal perspective, and how they feel about it. You know, the goal was to extend some of the COVID area flexibility to allow public bodies to hold remote meetings, because it's increased participation. It's allowed more involvement. It's allowed more people to volunteer that are busy. And that was sort of a half win, and has a lot of additional requirements to municipalities, and some recording and some postings. And I think there'll be some struggles on actually meeting some of this compliance. And it's pretty broad reaching. Don't disagree with the goals to modernize and move to a full hybrid requirement for all public bodies at some level, but there's going to be some growing pains, and probably some revisits on undefined elements of that bill. And last, I'll second what Laura said about the county and regional governance study. It's just a study, but it's a 1.5 year long study with 6 legislators and a technical advisory group. And it potentially has some very significant impacts in how we look to meet the needs of Vermonters, you know, thinking about things like equity and unfunded mandates, and the ways we get services and have the same opportunities for folks in every community, not just ones that have a lot of resources, but all. And so it'll be something to stay tuned to.
Great, thanks, Josh. Okay, well, it's clear you guys have been busy this year. And Chris and Polly, I'd love to start with the both of you. You know, there was a lot of talk this session, and I hear it, I heard it a lot this week even, about limiting spending, that resources are becoming more scarce. You know, when I first started with VCRD, all we heard about was this unprecedented funding opportunity, and now we're getting signals that might be changing, right? Have you seen that already, an impact or reduction in the resources available to communities and municipalities to get things done in their towns? And then how can communities best connect to available resources? Polly, do you want to go first?
Sure. So we certainly saw a kind of continued reduction in especially resources for housing production, affordable housing production this session. And I think kind of putting that in a broader multi-year framework, what having resources enabled us to do was to stand up a broad swath of programs that help meet many different housing needs. And we're now in the situation with the reduced funding of trying to figure out how to keep programs going and sustain programs at past levels. So it's both, do we see the same amount of funding coming through programs, and do we see the same number of programmatic offerings to communities? I think with the reduction in resources, there's a really strong policy debate over how do we want to target resources, and do we need to target resources to addressing Vermont's homelessness crisis? What does that look like? How does that shift resources from other parts of the housing spectrum? And then within housing as well, do we want to target resources to different types of housing, like manufactured home communities, and small apartments, large units, housing for folks with disabilities? And I think one of the impacts of trying to target resources to high impact areas is that actually reduces flexibility for communities to bring forward the projects that are right for them. So there's a push-pull conversation between should we leave kind of large buckets of funding that are broad, that communities can bring forward an idea for, or do we want to target towards high impact solutions and have that drive the type of projects that communities bring forward? So I think we landed kind of in between there. Again, there's those broad buckets of the ARPA funding that could mean that there's still that flexibility for communities to come forward with projects like one that VHCB recently participated in with a community group in Montpelier that bought a home for a refugee family, a really kind of unique model and a unique community partnership. Or are we going to shift resources in the direction of there's 10 million set aside for shelter, and particularly looking at temporary shelter that's going to be available quickly this winter because of the changes in eligibility in the hotel program. So municipalities are an eligible applicant for that get preference. So should communities be pivoting to looking at what are the resources out there and how can we identify projects that fit those resources? I think the other impact of this is going to be the importance of partnerships and leverage. And those two go together. The more partnerships you have in the project, the more different types of sources you can pull down, and really looking at how do we best draw down federal sources for housing, with a number of programs that are going to be rolling out through the Public Service Department for energy components of housing. So I think that the impact for communities is really looking at where are the priorities for the types of projects to be funded. Certainly I see a priority in that shelter space, but also a lot of interest in kind of middle income housing. And then the importance of identifying leverage sources and partnerships you need to have in place to draw down those.
Great. Thanks, Polly. And if you have any links to resources that communities might be able to look for what they might need, that would be great to drop in the chat or talk about later. So Chris, same question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have just a little bit more context here before I kind of go into some details. Prior to the pandemic, I would characterize our approach to doing community development was collaboration due to scarcity. Nobody really had enough people or resources to make things happen. So we often had kind of innovative partnerships to kind of bring resources together to deliver programs and projects that communities needed. The pandemic changed a lot of that. It was a huge opportunity. I think we launched a lot of new and innovative projects. I do feel like definitely this was a wake-up call that, you know, the largesse is ending, and how do we begin to pivot? I do think, we have legislators on the call who, I don't know, they may have different opinions, but I do think next year's budget is going to be a little tighter. Agencies are already feeling the pinch as far as like staffing and programs and resources and ability to deliver projects. But that said, I didn't see a huge pinch on some of the programs that I think that are important to municipalities. Some of our key partners, the regional planning commissions, they got a reasonable increase this year, and I believe the regional development corporations did too. And for all of you municipal folks, you know, please work with your RDCs and RPCs. They're great resources that can help you scope out your projects, connect you to grants and people who can make your projects happen. A program that we started during the pandemic, the Downtown Vitality Fund, that really supported our 24 downtown programs. They do a lot of important work to make sure that our downtowns remain interesting, engaging, funky, vital places with jobs and opportunity. Their money was able to be continued, so those grants will continue. The money for electric vehicle charging stations, that was also continued. So if your municipality is interested in creating a charging opportunity in the downtown or village center where people can plug in and visit your community and shop your stores, walk your trails, that's definitely something that there's an additional $1.7 million and a longer term funding sources for EV charging stations. So it's interesting. The governor tends not to like new fees, but there is a new fee on electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids that will ensure that we'll be able to expand the network of charging options around the state. So I think that was hopeful to me. Specifically to DHCD programs, and Sean Gilpin, one of my partners at the department, is here. An incredible program that he's stood up and run called VHIP did receive additional funding. He also received additional funding for his manufactured home improvement program. So this is exciting that these pandemic programs, legislature sees value in them and will continue investing in them. Some little losses that I think we saw, there was the downtown and village center tax credit program has been proven to really be a great tool to revitalize our communities. There was a proposal to increase that. That did not go forward. Sometimes it takes many years of conversation before those things happen. So I'm hopeful next year. And then another program that was stood up during the pandemic called Better Places. I'll put in a link about this. It's a great kind of community-based, empowering, crowd-granting incentive program that does place-based projects. It was a pilot program temporarily created during the pandemic. It was authorized to continue, so it's in statute now, but there's no funding for it. Next year, I think it'll be a tightening conversation, and we hope, again, we are serial collaborators. To Polly's point, there is still a significant chunk of federal funding out there, and that's a little bit of our strategy. My shop, we tend not to utilize a lot of federal programs, but there's some really interesting opportunities, and the feds are really kind of listening to states like Vermont for a change and figuring out, they often create programs that are very burdensome. So they're now actually packaging a lot of capacity and technical assistance with their programs to ensure that our smaller communities can take advantage of them. And I'll drop the mic there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was a lot. And if there's any links you want to share with folks either now or later, we'd appreciate that. Great. Well, appreciate Polly and Chris's perspective. I'd love to turn now to Josh and Representative Sibilia. Exactly what Chris was saying, kind of looking ahead to the next session. Where do you see the biggest needs coming from your perspective? Where is there more work that needs to be done? And what do you think should be the priority as you think of the health and vibrancy of our communities, especially? Josh, would you like to go first?
Sure, and let me just segue off of what Chris and Polly said is sort of what I see coming up next year. I think that there is still a lot of federal funds out there. I think that was part of why they were able to pass a budget without controversy. Yes, there were some cuts and some new programs that weren't continually funded, but there's still a lot of federal money flowing through the systems. And part of that is because just because there's money in programs doesn't mean there's anyone at the other end to catch them and implement them. And we have a capacity challenge. We've had the fire hose on with funding for 3-4 years, and barely could catch up in many places. And I think that's proven the point that just having money to do things to help people doesn't necessarily help them. You have to actually have systems in place. You have to actually have the capacity and the right framework to really benefit. And we have some challenges in that space. And I think that's going to be part of what next year's session is going to tackle. A lot of these new municipal, the bills that impact municipalities, whether it's the open meeting law, the ethics bill, the tax sale, there's a number of them are going to prove that out, that we have expectations that folks in every corner of the state have equal access and opportunity, and with the importance of equity, but our sort of ideals don't match up with many of our systems of government, and where we choose to spend our money and what our priorities are. They don't necessarily match up with that sort of ideal, and there's going to be some reckoning to sort of to deal with, to how to get that right, what that means. And in a big sense, it's as simple as this: have we assigned the right responsibilities of government to the right level of government? And how you accomplish that, whether through regional partnerships, collaboration, county government, I don't have the answer. All I know is that it doesn't matter what system you look at in Vermont, whether it's school districts, fire departments, police, EMS, you go on, there's stresses in the system. A lot of it's relying on the backs of volunteers to do critical government services that keep people safe. Is that the system that's going to move us into the next century? Or do we need to look at something else? And I think from my perspective, that's really where a lot of discussion needs to be, because there has been resources, we've made improvements, but systems are stressed, and it's around the capacity issue. And there's maybe some new ways we need to do things, and it'll be tough conversations that need to have everyone at the table with their best interests, and sort of leave their own baggage behind to really solve the problems.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Representative Sibilia?
So yes, and yes to everything that Josh just said. I mean, that is really front and center for many communities, and especially our smaller and rural communities. And I would also note, in terms of resources, there are some programs that have been in place that have been helping communities plan or start to plan. And that is also a really key element to having projects be funded. And so, as others have said, just having a fire hose, if you're not prepared, if you don't have a plan, if you haven't had your community conversations, if there isn't a system there to support you, it's not necessarily helpful. And so I think about the Municipal Energy Resilience Program that so many communities have been engaging in. There's been so much work and energy by communities. There will not be enough money to fund all of the projects. that come out of that, but there will have been all of this work. And so, what are the next steps that we can help communities take to get those projects funded? Similarly, municipal technical assistance program, which the Rural Caucus worked on to help all of our communities be able to access these federal funds because they don't have the capacity, right? They haven't done the work, they don't have the projects. They're not ready to receive those funds, but they certainly do have the needs, and in many cases, the needs are even more significant. So what will be the leftover from those programs? What will the opportunity be that our communities have created for themselves, and the knowledge that they're able to give us in terms of programs, financing programs, other types of programs that can be helpful for both energy and flood resilience programs. I certainly think thinking about our systems and how to right size our systems is an imperative. And I do believe that there will be major conversations around our education system next year, and ongoing conversations about the capacity of our communities to react to any number of things, including the changing demographics, climate change, and the digitization of everything, and our privacy in that space. So,
thank you. And I just want to note that Representative Sibilia named a program that VCRD is participating in as one of the partners and resource providers, and we do have additional capacity to offer to some of our lower capacity communities in partnership with our PCs and VLCT. So I'll put our link in the chat, but we're happy to, play telephone too and connect you to other MTAP providers, is what it's called. And somehow I'm coming out as Laura Cavan Bailey in the chat, but I'm not. She is here. Okay. Well, thank you all for giving us a sense of where things are and sort of the top things that we should keep in mind. I did want to kind of pick up on one of the themes that I heard from all of you, and one of the themes that we heard even going into the session was going to be the buzzword. Lots of communities, and I can say this is true, are thinking about resilience of all kinds, what it takes to have social resilience, physical resilience, climate resilience, and more. Are there any initiatives that you want to highlight that emerged this session that could support that work in communities, and any resources available? And I just want to note, if we can keep this kind of brief, I'd love to move into the breakouts around 10:55. So who'd like to kick that one off? Why don't I go back to Polly and then Josh? Yes.
So one big picture thought and one very distinct resource. So I'll start with a distinct resource. I'll drop this chat in afterwards, but the HCB administers the Rural Economic Development Initiative that can provide grant writing support to communities that are looking to take on projects that either help with housing, working lands, and community economic development more broadly. So I'll drop that link in the chat, and the person at the other end of the phone is my colleague Mariah, who is always open to taking phone calls and talking through community projects and first steps with folks. And that is another program that is receiving funding through the MTAP program. So we're really seeing that resource get out and help communities.
Great, thanks.
And I'm not going to forget to do that. I think big picture, there is a conversation started in the House Ways and Means Committee about what is the universe of federal funding around resilience, green infrastructure, and energy, especially coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and what do we need to have here in Vermont to draw down those funds. An important part of that conversation is it then linked to the rural capacity conversation as well. So I think we're going to see that continue to develop as we move through the summer and into next session.
Thanks, Polly. And hi, Mariah. I thought I saw you there. Okay, Josh, would you go next?
Sure, I'll be very quick here. So there were two big flood sort of response bills. One is the Flood Safety Act, and when it comes to resiliency, impacts of flooding, the Flood Safety Act has some major components to it that, you know, municipalities sort of changed their approach to things. We said, yes, regulate us, state. We don't want, we can't handle regulation of river corridors in our communities, mostly. Floods don't stop at borders. They knock out transportation systems and bridges and homes all throughout a watershed. We don't have the capacity, the expertise to take on this task and recognize that this is something that should be done at the state level. That was a big change and a shift, but after repeated floods every 10 years, folks have come to change their perspective on this. And so having A&R map the river corridors and regulate them, there's still an opt-in for municipalities to if they're sophisticated enough and want to have standards even higher than the state, they can assume that responsibility, but most will likely rely on the state. And that's a big move forward that we didn't do in the last few floods, of recognizing that that's where the most damage occurs, and we need to be smarter about development in river corridors, as well as increasing, you know, floodplains and flood safety hazards, so that regulations, so that communities can access flood insurance. We're at risk because we have so many different ways that we regulate things, and every community is different, that we're at risk of having some communities not comply with minimum standards and be eligible for FEMA flood insurance. So these are big steps forward that will help with the actual impacts of climate change that are already here. You know, there's a lot of bigger picture stuff happening, but I'm kind of looking at the, you know, here and now. That's the most impactful for me, is we have to deal with the immediate impacts of these repeated floods and sort of learn from them in a way that we haven't done in the last several decades. And that was a big step forward.
Thanks, Josh. Representative Sibilia?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the technical work that's been happening with communities through the MTAP program, and thinking about projects to help them be safer, help them keep their residents safer, and I think I will leave it at that. There's so much focus on resilience. I could talk about any number of things, but when we think about the work that the Rural Caucus has done and their focus, I would point to that, and the Act 250 bill as pretty significant bills focused on resilience.
Thanks. Chris?
I'll be quick. For the longest time, I think the focus from A&R's Climate Action Office was a lot of emissions accounting, and a lot of kind of math and logging data collections around how do we hit our emissions targets. I think the floods of last year really pivoted a lot of their thinking and really focused their energies and time on how do we make our communities more resilient, and how do we provide those resources to help those communities avoid a catastrophic flood. If we don't have buildings in the floodplain, or if they're designed to get wet and get rinsed off, then our communities, you know, rinse off and move on. So some things that they're working on in this space, and I don't have a link I can post on it, but A&R was working on a municipal vulnerability index, indicating kind of overall risks of communities. But what we needed is that next step. So, okay, we understand we have some risks that we need to tackle, but we don't have the capacity and expertise to figure out climate resilient strategies. So we're working on right now an RFP, and we're probably going to target this partnership with 4 or 5 communities, and really kind of dig in, communities of different scales, so we can learn from different methodologies. How do you actually do climate resilience? And this, in a lot of ways, is really going to help a lot of communities identify the projects they want to do, identify the gaps in their plans, and then we hope set them up for, you know, for better, for worse, you know, when we have an event, we do get a big chunk of hazard mitigation grants. And I think the total pot exceeds $90 million. So if we can help communities figure out what their priorities are, then they have this opportunity to actually take the steps to make their community more resilient. One little thing I forgot to mention too, it's a really flexible fund for municipalities looking at climate resilience, is the municipal planning grant program. That got a small increase, but it's a really low barrier, easy program. And what I've hated about the program right now is the platform that we have to use to offer the grants. It's being modernized, so it will be a much more user-friendly and accessible program. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. And it's come up a lot throughout this conversation, but I want to note there's a lot of Regional Planning Commission and Regional Development Corporation partners on this call. So just want to shout out to you guys because a lot of what we're talking about, there's an interface there with what you do. So, okay, well, now's the time to do our fun breakout group thing. So you got to bear with us. This is all like in the moment, right? So Lauren, thank you so much. She not only culled all the themes, but she made a lovely Google Doc where all of it is kept. So what I thought we would do, Lauren, do you wanna do the big reveal and tell everybody what the themes were from our waterfall?
I would love to. Sure. Yeah, I don't think it'll be a huge surprise. And before I get into the 4 that we've created breakout rooms for, I'll just say some ones that didn't rise to the top, but were named and I think are important to talk about as well. So those few that are sort of subcategories are digital equity and privacy came up a few times, education spending, arts and culture, which actually I think can be incorporated into economic development and some of the other breakout rooms as well. And then racism and ethnic studies in education. And while I'll say that sort of specific idea wasn't echoed many times, I did see a really strong theme of both economic and racial equity throughout all the things that you guys put in the chat. So keeping that in mind, the 4 breakout rooms that I am opening, the first is Act 250 is its title, and people were talking about land use in different regions, clean water, effects on housing and development, responding to flood resilience, and some other things. Housing is the second. People were talking especially about development, affordability, farm workers, housing for new Americans and resettlement efforts, and then flood recovery and resilience again. The third is addressing climate change. So that people were talking about clean water, equitable resilience, renewable energy standard, and energy more generally. Flood response and recovery. And I'm just going to put a link in the chat also to our flood response and recovery VCLN workshop that we did last month. And then economic development is the 4th. So that's workforce, small businesses, arts and culture, villages, downtowns, and again, new Americans and resettlement. So I'm opening those up now, and we're going to ask you all to, you're going to be able to assign yourselves to the breakout rooms that you're most interested in. And one of our panelists will be in each of those rooms. So Jess, do you want to go through that?
Sure. Well, I think there's some natural fits, but you guys tell me. This is my thought, and you can be like, you can switch it up in the moment, right? So I'm thinking, Chris, Act 250, is that okay? Do you want to do that one, or does Josh want to take that one? I could go.
Oh no, Laura wants to do that one.
Laura. Up to you guys, really.
No, I think I could probably fit in every room, but I probably need to go to the Act 250 room.
Thank you. Thank you. Polly, would you take housing? That feels like a natural fit.
Happy to.
Okay. And then this one, I don't know. Laura, I could see you taking economic development with both your professional hat and your legislator hat. Does that work? Does it? Unless you want to do climate change.
I can do either.
You guys could, rock, paper, scissors.
What would you like to do, Josh?
Either. Yeah, I don't think I'm particularly suited as an expert on one above the other.
Sure. It's really about talking about what you're seeing and listening to people. It's all good. Okay, so Josh, why don't you do addressing climate change then? And I think, yeah. And then Representative Sibilia could take economic development. Okay. So what we're gonna do is everybody should be choosing a breakout room. You'll have the panelist as kind of your moderator. And really it's again focused on this legislative session. So it's a chance to go a little deeper. Like what happened during this session that you think is important to your community? What do you have questions about given everything we just talked about? What challenges or opportunities do you want to discuss? What resources do you need to take action in your community? So this is really your chance as participants to talk about what's going on in your town and maybe have a deeper discussion about matching up how the legislative session is landing in your community. Does that make sense to everybody? Really, you can talk about whatever you want. I do ask that everybody continues to be respectful and recognize that everybody's here because they care about doing good things for the state. We'll give you about 20-ish minutes. We'll come back here at a little after 11:20, and then the panelists will give us their reflections on the conversation. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. And thanks for doing that experiment. I know we've lost some folks along the way, and that's okay too. And we'll share the recording afterwards, so even those who had to leave can kind of get the whole sense of things. But I'd love to turn to the panelists and kind of hear your reflections. Was there any like aha moments, takeaways, like anything that really struck you? And Representative Sibilia, you want to kick that off?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think we loved this and also didn't have enough time. So we might want more time next time. But we heard a couple of things around collaboration, digital equity, but two notions around both new Americans in housing and kind of what's the intersection of that as those folks are coming in to our workforce. How are we addressing the housing issues? And we also heard about, as we are looking at changes in our education system and potentially more changes in our education system, what kind of resources are there going to be for rural communities with children? And is there an opportunity to create spaces for kids and communities that are perhaps losing a school or a small school? So highlights for you there.
Thank you. Thanks. So we'll add more time for this part of this for our legislative wrap-up session for sure. Who wants to go next? Chris, Josh?
Yeah, I can go quickly. Yeah, I thought I'd be overwhelmed with land use notes, but I only got like 3 or 4 people in our group. Our conversation was most of the people just wanted a little bit more overview and information about how the bill changes kind of where we are and how it's, I think, going to transition. I think there was a concern about equity and how this is going to be launched and making sure that our rural communities are not left out as we transition from where we are to this new framework. So I was able to talk about, we have a new board structure. So the downtown board ends, and we have basically a new focus on financial people on our board. So the state treasurer, the head of the bond bank, RDCs now have a rep on our board, and along with the other sister agencies and other partners representing other interests, the Office of Racial Equity now has a seat on our board. And how they are a platform to kind of figuring out kind of what I mentioned initially, like how do we deliver services in a more integrated and more meaningful way that is easier for communities, particularly our smaller communities, to access. And then I mentioned a report that we're working on. It's not this year, it's going to be next year, but it's a big conversation. I think you probably know about this, Jessica, but like, how do we do rural service delivery in this state more effectively and efficiently? We all own pieces of it, but I think there's an opportunity to step back and figure out how we can work together more effectively and efficiently to help our small towns. To Laura and Josh's point, without capacity, those opportunities just sail right by you, and we need to figure out how to fix that. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Josh.
Sure. So we talked about climate, but really what we talked about is transportation and housing, as they impact climate, as we transition to, more electric vehicles and a cleaner transportation system, needing to revamp how we fund transportation because it's all based on a fossil fuel system. And if it's changing rapidly, we need to adjust to those changes and come up with new funding because those vehicles are going to use the same roads and we have to catch up quick.
Yeah.
We also talked about sort of the push and pull between sort of moving people into requiring them to switch to different sort of thermal heating systems that don't rely on fossil fuel, as opposed to really weatherizing existing properties so that the fuel usage goes down anyways, and the sort of pocketbooks are hit in different ways and different incentives, and the need for the workforce to do that weatherization. There's been some big chunks of money put out in one huge hit a couple of years and it goes away, and having something more sustainable, lower barrier, always available to help people make a more consistent transition to weatherize their homes and apartments would be a good step. And then some really short time at the end, but what's next for climate change and bills? And really my reaction too was we have a lot of catching up to do with the work that has been passed the last few years. There's a lot of work on the table that is yet to be done in our delivery, whether it's A&R or other providers need to get to that work. We need to evaluate how it's going. We need to look at what sort of take an inventory and stock in what we're doing, I think, before we put something new to see where we should adjust. Not that we shouldn't keep moving forward, but we have a lot to do to see what we've done and what's working right to reinvest in.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Broad topic, Josh. Thanks for taking it on. And last but not least, we have Holly. Where'd you go? There you are. I don't know why everyone got mixed up when you came back. I'm like, where is she?
So our group talked about housing, and I think the conversation began around a feeling of how stuck the market is and the impact that has on people who need to access housing, the impact it has on our workforce, our employers who can't hire because people can't access housing, and generally on the ability of our communities to grow and thrive. The conversation turned to what opportunities folks saw, and a lot of that was around excitement around infill. Central Vermont did RPC did an infill study in Barrie to identify locations. We had a discussion about the potential for ADUs and small scale development. Chris, I did share the Vermont Homes for All toolkit, which is a toolkit for emerging developers to build small 1 to 4 unit infill homes in communities. So there's just a lot of excitement about the possibility for building these denser communities. But that also led to a question about equity, especially access to amenities like natural areas. If we move in a direction where we're building this dense housing, how do we also ensure that people who need to access smaller, affordable housing, probably multifamily housing, also have the ability to access nature as well? As someone coming from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, that conversation always really excites me about how do we ensure that we're keeping that link in place while meeting both goals. So that was kind of the housing conversation in a nutshell. Transportation also came up, and water and wastewater capacity also came up.
Yeah, great. Well, really, thank you to everybody who showed up today. It's been a really interesting conversation. Clearly, a lot happened, and so there'll be future opportunities, I bet, from each of these organizations, and always the legislature as well. I can imagine there's going to be a lot of resources coming out and deeper learning on things, especially those things that are going to happen over multi-years over that came from this session. So we're going to compile all the resources that we heard about today and maybe throw in a few extras and send it back out to everybody, as well as the recording, which should be posted really soon here. And thank you so much to our panelists. It was wonderful, and I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Take care.